Beller, world-class bassist, world-class musician, currently on tour with Mike Keneally and Beautiful Dolphins, exclusively for World Prog-Nation. Bryan, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me, Alfredo. It's my honor.
Yeah. How are you?
Good. Really good. Really good. Having a great time with Mike. You know, Mike Keneally and I have been playing together for 23 years now. And he's put out a ton of albums since then. And he's an absolute genius. And he's a mentor of mine in a lot of ways. And I've followed him, you know, in many different career paths as well. So it's always great to be able to do shows with Mike and with Rick Musalem on other guitar and Joe Travers on drums. We have friendships that go way, way back.
Well, yeah, and it certainly shows. I was able to watch you guys yesterday at your show in San Francisco, and you know, the musical chemistry is undeniable.
Joe Travers and I have been playing together since 1991. We went to Berklee College of Music together.
Wow.
So that's my oldest musical relationship.
Different world back then.
It sure was. No internet.
Yep. Well, you are one of the world's hardest working bassists. You have played with some of music's biggest names. Where do you find the inspiration to always, you know, keep your playing and creativity at the highest level, you know, with such a grueling schedule over the years?
Well, the good news is that, you know, having all these gigs kind of does it for me. You know, my aspiration ever since I was young was always to be in a great band. It was never to be the poster boy for bass heroism. It's just, I mean, and there's a nature of bass players, I think, to begin with, is that you're not necessarily looking to stand in the front of the stage. I mean, like, yeah, you get your Billy Sheehan, you get your Flea. I mean, there's exceptions. But for the most part, bass players choose bass because they want to play bass, because they want to play a supporting role in the band. And it's not just a supporting role. To me, it's a key, powerful role. It's the only instrument that really serves as the central fulcrum between the rhythm elements and the melodic elements of the music. So it's really important to do that job right.
Right.
And that's all I ever wanted to do in a band that made great music. And for me, that music, starting from an early age, a lot of it was progressive. I mean, I was a huge Pink Floyd and Yes fan when I was younger. Those were my two big progressive bands. I went way into them. You know, one of those bands has a very active bass player. The other one has a very, very, you know, role-playing bass player.
Yes.
To me, it didn't matter. It was just about the music that mattered. So, you know, when I translate that into now, I ended up in this kind of world where I'm playing with a lot of hotshot guitarists, which seems to be my destiny. You know, Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, Guthrie Govan, Mike Keneally. They're writing challenging material. And the challenge is just for me to show up and just support those songs as best I can. And that's what I've really always tried to do, more so than develop any kind of super extended technique or anything like that. There's, you know, Stu Hamm and the guys, Victor Wooten. I mean, there's guys out there that are doing that are just amazing, and they can do that, and that's great. I just want to make the band sound good. Not that you can't make the band sound good doing something on extended technique, but this is just my choice.
Sure. All right. Okay. Well, Bryan, you have been very busy lately touring the world with the Aristocrats, Joe Satriani, Beautiful Dolphins now. You know, with Mike Keneally, with Joe Travers, and Rick Musalem.
Yep.
So, what excites you about performing live?
You know what excites me about performing live is when everything sounds great. Everything's because the sound, I think, is the fundamental cornerstone of the ability to communicate effectively as musicians. If you're on stage, you can have the greatest musicians and the greatest music in the world, and like if all the sounds that are coming out don't work, or if it sounds bad on stage or in the venue, it can just get really weird. You know, everyone's sitting there trying to figure out why they can't hear the drummer or something, you know, instead of like focusing on the music. So to me, that's like the first thing. But then after that, it's, you know, it's the music, the actual material. What is it that you're trying to convey? Will that be effective in a live environment? And when that all comes together, when you're playing with, you know, people that you like, you know, being around, and everybody's making good sounds, and the music is really good, and you've got an appreciative audience, all those things can come together into, you know, a magical kind of shared experience in the room. And to me, that's like, you know, that's a magic thing. It's not easy to pull off, actually. You know, there's a lot of shows where certain things are good, other things are not good. That's just the nature of playing live and being on tour, and that's fine. But I think that it's important to aspire to the conditions being right for success in that way. To present that night that where someone can walk out and go, maybe a listener who hasn't come to see a show by that band before go, oh wow, they were good. But then there's that other listener who's been to 5 shows, and he can walk out or she can walk out and be like, wow, that was a special night. I know that was a special night because I saw those other ones and those were good, but that was great. Right. That's what I live for.
Yeah, great. Any stand-up moments in recent history?
Well, it's just the other night with Mike Keneally, we played the Baked Potato in Los Angeles, which is like our hometown venue, and it's a famous venue that a lot of high-flying jazz and fusion artists have played over the years. It's like an honor to play there, just the first place. And we had a set on the second night that we played there of 2 nights. Just everything was right. Mm-hmm. And Mike's, as you know now, Mike Keneally's music is highly improvisational, even though it's inside forms. It's like, he can take the music in any direction at any time. So you can't go on autopilot with this stuff. Mm-hmm. And it also, creates a different kind of high wire than just playing difficult material. This is like band communication, sophistication, high level stuff. And everything was great. Everything was perfect. The sound, the audience, the vibe, the material, everything was great. So that was great. And of course, I've had those moments with other bands. I mean, I can pick out a Joe Satriani show where I felt like, everything was just totally amazing. I'd have to go back and look at the calendar now, but I remember there were a couple that I really liked. Same thing with the Aristocrats, it's like, some nights it's good and it works, and some nights it's great because the sound and the audience vibe and everything kind of comes together. I remember on the last U.S. tour, the Atlanta show was really special. We all agreed. And then sometimes, of course, one person in the band will think that the show is really great, and the other guy will go, ah! So then getting everybody to agree that the show was even great in the first place is a whole other thing. I think we all felt that the Atlanta show was really special on the last U.S. tour. And we also felt that there were some shows in Asia that were really good. There was one in Europe at the Boderach in Zoetermeer, the Netherlands, which is a hard venue to make sound good. Okay. And that night it worked, and it was really, really great, and we had a great time. So it doesn't happen like that because life doesn't happen like that. Mm-hmm. They can't all be great, but when they are, it's nice.
Yeah, but when it happens,
exactly.
It elevates
exactly
to a different level.
Yeah,
that's great. Now you have mentioned this a little bit, but your musical collaboration with Mike Keneally and Joe Travers goes back a very long time, and like I said before, your chemistry shows, and I believe that comes from so many years of playing together. Can you share some thoughts on this gentleman?
Yeah. So Joe Travers, he's a couple years older than me, mm-hmm. and in college a couple years is a big difference, but of course now who cares, we're in our 40s, whatever. So anyway, I wanted to play with him when I saw him play at Berkeley. He was already an established guy there, and I was like, that guy's great. That's the drummer that I really want to play with. And so it took a little while, but I started playing with him. And then, making a long story very short, he moved to Los Angeles when he graduated and got the gig with Dweezil Zappa because he was a huge Zappa fan. Mm-hmm. He was like, from an early age, it was all he wanted to do. And unfortunately, Frank Zappa was already sick and he couldn't tour anymore. So that's why he joined Dweezil's band. And then 6 months later, the bass slot opened up, and then he got me an audition, and then I was in Dweezil's band together. And so now we're playing together in Dweezil's band, and Mike Keneally was already in Dweezil's band because he had been playing with Frank before that. And so that's how I got to know Mike Keneally. And then the interesting bit was, when I heard Mike Keneally's solo material, I realized that I liked it in a way that I'd never really liked any music before. It had touches of the progressive stuff, but it also had touches of pop, like Beatles. He's a huge Beatles fan. Mm-hmm. So, and then he also had touches of the real Frank Zappa, uncut, weird shit, and all sorts of other stuff. And so I fell in love with his music. And then a couple years later, then I was playing with him. Eventually we left Dweezil's band in 1996, and that was when Mike Keneally's solo touring career really started. We did a tour where he opened up for Steve Vai, and also played in Steve's band at the same time, which was a lot of work for him, but it was cool. Sure, yeah. And people will listen to the Mike Keneally repertoire and just think, oh my God, how could you possibly know all that music and memorize it without charts, because the forms are really, really complicated. But, you know, the truth is I've had 23 years to learn it all. So it's not as difficult as it would seem. Yeah, if someone just downloaded 40 songs on me and said, okay, you got to learn these, that would be rough.
Right.
But it hasn't gone down like that. So, and Joe and Mike and I have been through a lot together. A lot. And of course, you know, Joe went on to do more stuff with the Zappa family. He played with Zappa Plays Zappa, the touring band, and now he's the Vaultmeister for the Zappa family, which means that he's the curator of the archive. And Mike and I went on to do his thing, and then he played in Steve Vai's band, and then I played in Steve Vai's band, and then the two of us played in Brendan Small's Death Clock project, and as now we're in Joe Satriani's band together. And it was also because of Mike Keneally that we found Marco Miniman, because he had played with a Finnish bass player named Jan Westman, who was saying back in 2004 or 5, hey, there's this drummer in Germany you need to know about. And that's how we ended up coming over to Europe and doing a quick pickup tour with Marco, who heard this material for the first time and played it amazingly, which was like really, really impressive. So it's all gone through Mike Keneally one way or the other.
Yeah, Mike's the man.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Bryan. So now let's shift gears a little bit. So an unfortunate experience for you turned into one of the most inspirational stories of recent times as far as people uniting in a common cause. I'm talking, of course, about the theft of your equipment. Now the response was overwhelming, and your story that you wrote was shared by tens of thousands worldwide. How do you feel about this response, and can you give us an update?
This could easily take the rest of the interview and then some. So let me, first of all, for anyone who doesn't know what you're talking about, most of my instruments were stolen at the end of last year out of a storage space. I had them there. Why they were there is I live in a bit of a remote area, and there's temperature issues in the place where I live, and it was just the right thing to do at the time. It turned out to be the wrong thing to do at the time. This story is no longer up online, actually. I took it down. But in the days that followed, anyone who knows me knows that I can be a little bit obsessive. And what I did was I posted on social media, like, you know, everybody's like, what are you going to do? The most powerful tool I have against people who have decided to invade my space, take things that aren't theirs because no one was stopping them. You know, the only real powerful force multiplier I have in response to that is social media and leveraging, you know, the fact that, you know, a lot of people know who I am, more people know who I am than, like, you know, someone who works in an office somewhere, you know, and sometimes that's a blessing and sometimes it's not a blessing. In this case, it was an advantage. So I posted on social media pictures of all my instruments, especially the red one, this Mike Lowell Modern 5 that I've been playing forever, that's on the Steve Vai DVD that most people who've seen me play this instrument. And yeah, it was shared 15,000 times, and it was viewed by over 2 million people, which is just insane. Fortunately, one of them worked at a Sam Ash store where people came in and pawned some of the stuff that they had stolen. And because of that, I'm making a long story very short now, I was able to, because they had the name of the person who pawned it, I was able to work with the police, and 2 days later we were able to actually find them and arrest them. I was hoping that we would, because they were at their own storage space, we thought that maybe they had the gear there, but they didn't. So I didn't get any of the stuff back. We got the electronics back. They pawned all that, but I didn't get any of the instruments back. And so the rest of the year, there's a whole other story that I never posted. So after that happened, when the arrest actually happened, then I posted this long story that a lot of people read. And that was great. But there's a part of the story that was never posted. And I can only give you broad outlines of it. But basically, I did know where one of the instruments was because we saw who was selling it. And I started doing a little bit of work into trying going there and finding, you know, if there was a way to get it back from them. And boy, did I really not luck out with the people who took them. Fortunately, you know, I was insured. And so here's your advertisement. Insurance is always worth it. I always tell people insurance is always worth it. I mean, it's like, I can't tell you how many times I've looked at my insurance premiums for something else and been like, oh, why am I paying this? And then something happens, and then the insurance is worth it. Insurance is always worth it. So I was able to take that insurance money and work with Mike Lowell and Spectre basses and work and learn a lot actually about why I like the basses that I liked, which I really hadn't done a lot of work on. I'm a big amplifier and effects guy, and I'm super tweaky about that. But instruments, I was always more instinctive. Like I pick up this one, I was like, oh, this is cool. I had never really gone deep into like preamps and pickups and size of frets and neck material. I mean, I knew something about it, but I didn't know a ton about it. Last 6 months, I've learned a lot about it. And so now, thanks to really, really great work by Mike Lowell and Paul Schuster at Mike Lowell, and PJ Rubel and Stuart Spector at Spectre, and also, let me not forget, Clyde Clark at Bartolini, and Kevin Beller, and Arwen at Seymour Duncan, and Carrie Nordstrand at Nordstrand, and Rob Turner and Tommy at EMG. I mean, I've really been fortunate enough to work with the people who are making like the best stuff out there right now, and why certain combinations work in certain instruments, and why I like the instruments that I like now is no longer a mystery to me. And so I have a collection of new instruments now that aren't what I had. Some of them are never coming back, maybe, you know. I mean, they're not made anymore. Materials that were used to make them aren't made anymore. That is what it is. You just got to let go. But I have really cool new stuff, and I'm working it out with the Mike Keneally tour we're doing right here, and it's a great repertoire to work it out on because I've been playing it for 23 years. So of course it's a great proving ground for new instruments.
Yes.
So, like I said in the beginning, you know, what makes a great live show? You know, and these are what my clinics are all about when I do them. It's the sound. The sound of something is everything, and I'll say that until I'm blue in the face. You know, it's like when you turn on a record and you hear John Scofield playing, you know, are you like, oh wow, that was a really cool half diminished scale? No, you're like, oh, that's John Scofield. I know because I can hear the way he sounds. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with any signature artist like that. So I am very, very happy and grateful that I've been able to get good instruments back, and actually new instruments, and get some new sounds in addition to the ones that I already knew and liked.
Yeah, and not only that, but also you know, increase your knowledge of
exactly.
How
Yeah,
to make
and one last thing. There were an incredible amount of people who were helpful. Not just the guy at Sam Ash who was like the hero of the story. Without him, just so many things wouldn't have been possible. But there were a lot of people who were watching online, trying to see an eBay and Craigslist and OfferUp and all these places to see if anything. Even though they didn't turn up, the effort that some of these people put in was like really unbelievable. So I'm just grateful to the community at large that people come together. And one last thing: do not keep your valuable things in storage spaces. The security there is very, very bad. Okay.
Thank you for sharing and for the advice. Okay, so as we have mentioned, you have been doing this for a long time, and over the years you have seen changes in musical tastes and certainly in the music industry. What are some of the things that you have done to adapt to these changes through time and remain a successful working musician?
You know, I'm not sure I've really paid any conscious attention to that. Mm-hmm. Of course, music changes and culture changes and everything changes. Nothing stays the same. Mm-hmm. But I have worked on my artistry for whatever it is for many years, and it is what it is. I mean, like, you know, I'm not going to like suddenly reinvent myself because there's some new musical trend going on. And maybe I'm a little bit old school in that way, but that's fine. You know, so I'm not sure I have a really profound answer to that question. I listen to some new music, but not a lot. And I think that whatever I'm doing is a reflection of not just the musical trends that are new or not, or music I'm listening to or not, but the content of our lives. You know, that's what really informs music, because it's a spiritual, how do I say this? There's spiritual output in music if you're doing it right, I think.
Yes.
So the input that comes before the spiritual output is your life. So life changes. Those are the changes that affect my musicality more than any kind of cultural trend.
Right. Yeah, and definitely awareness of that and dedication to your craft. That's certainly profound.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. I mean, I you know, I know there's bass players out there who practice a lot more than I do, and I've never been a practicing taskmaster when it comes to just playing bass technique, whatever. Sometimes that gets in the way. You know, imagine how I felt when I joined a band with Guthrie Govan and Marco Miniman, and I realized I hadn't been practicing technique as often as I should. But you know what? It all works out. I really do believe that in the end, whatever's supposed to happen is going to happen in that way.
Yeah. All right. Couple more questions. Now, you recently shared the exciting news that work on your new solo album has taken place. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Absolutely. So I have, for people who don't know, or maybe they only know me from the Aristocrats or Joe Satriani, I actually put out 2 solo albums in the aughts. One in 2003, was my first solo album called View, and then another solo album in 2008 called Thanks in Advance, and a live album in 2011 of our band playing at the Big Potato. And I didn't think that I could even write material when I was younger, but then this stuff came out. And it's interesting. I've gone back and forth as to whether or not I wanted to emphasize my progressive roots or my kind of more rock fusion or fusion roots. And I think that my first album is more of a progressive album, even though there's fusion stuff in it. And my second album is more of a fusion album, even though there's progressive stuff in it. But then, the Aristocrats came along. And so all of my compositional output since 2008 has gone towards the Aristocrats. We've made 3 albums, and each album has 3 songs from each songwriter on it. So there's an album's worth of Bryan Beller material on the 3 Aristocrats albums now. And it's also a different kind of writing because it's writing for trio. A couple of years ago, I started to feel that I had something artistic and there was a story I wanted to tell. And the Aristocrats, the songs have little stories in them, as anyone who's seen an Aristocrats show can tell you. But I'm a big believer in albums. And my favorite albums of my youth are Pink Floyd albums, not because I love Pink Floyd's music more than anybody else's, although I think they're great. Because I think that they, for some reason, and a lot of this is a Roger Waters thing, have figured out the thematic concept of an album. You really enter a world with them when you're listening to one of their albums. I always really admired that about them. The very first album I ever owned was The Wall, and I found myself kind of gravitating towards that narrative concept whenever I made a solo album. But the first 2 solo albums, I was pretty young, and I was kind of a younger composer, and I hadn't had as much experience. And then, after all this touring into the Aristocrats and then some things that happened in my life, I felt like I had something to say again. And so there's been this rumbling in my head ever since 2013 and 14. And little by little, as I was doing all this work with the Aristocrats and Joe Satriani, there was this kind of bomb that was building in my head, to the point where I had enough material in my head for a double album. It's just sitting up there. So I was singing it all in a voice memo and making text notes of it, just saying, one day I'm going to get to this and I'm going to write it out. And so I have this 18-song running order. I know the titles of all the songs. I know the name of the album. I know how all the songs go. I know the grooves. I know the keys. I mean, if I could open up my mouth and the sound of an album would come out, this would all be a lot easier. But of course, it doesn't work like that. You have to make the record. So when I finally got done with the double touring cycles of Joe Satriani and the Aristocrats earlier this year, I sat down to finally start demoing this stuff. As you can imagine, the kind of apprehension, it's this song's been in my head for 2-3 years. Is it going to come out the way that I imagine it? Fortunately, it did, and it has. And so now I have I imagine it as a double album, like double vinyl, the old-fashioned double album. And if you think about it that way, side 1 and side 2, the first LP, are now fully demoed, 9 songs. And I'm really happy with what I've got so far. And then now I'm taking a little break from writing because I'm on tour with Mike, and also because I went to Brazil with Joe Satriani. But for the rest of the year, starting next week, I'm going to lock myself in the room again, and I'm going to spend 3 more months demoing these things out. Right. And so when it's done, if I've done it right, I'm going to have this, I'm going to have this double album, which I don't want to say the title of it right now, but I'm looking at it as a modern progressive musical concept. That's the words that arise to me in language to describe this. It's a modern progressive musical concept, and it's my favorite albums in this way. there are musical themes that show up, throughout the record, even though they're in different songs. Maybe they get turned around in different ways. Somehow, if I do it right, it will feel like a unified piece of work. And that's what I'm shooting for. I know it's kind of like a high bar. I've mentioned like The Wall, and like another album that's made a huge impact on me is Nine Inch Nails' The Fragile, which is a double album. It's not a coincidence that Bob Ezrin was a part of both of those records in terms of some production and sequencing. But that's my idea for this, and on the record there's going to be a lot of different musicians, people I've worked with in various different bands, and I wanted to have that kind of feeling where it's all encompassing. A lot of different flavors, a lot of different styles, a lot of different moods, but in the end, it's always kind of having to come through my filter because I'm the songwriter.
Yeah.
So it's an ambitious project, and I'll be tracking it next year. And hopefully I'll have it out by the end of next year, but that's as soon as I'm going to be able to get it out. It's just, these things take a lot of time, and I don't like rushing.
Well, it sounds very exciting, and like you said,
Yeah.
You can't rush a great thing.
Well, it's interesting. I said by starting it off, like my first record was a little bit more progressive, and my second record was a little more fusion. And I was kind of my own solo artistry was kind of like always, I was trying to find myself in what it was that I really wanted to say, and finally I've just kind of came down off the fence. This is a progressive album, and it's not like there's playing on it, but it's not shreddy at all. There will be moments where it's complex and dense, and moments for musicians to stand out, but it'd be very, very different than say an Aristocrats album where it's like we're going for it a lot on those records. This is more about melody and sonic atmosphere and thematic mood. Again, if I do it right.
Great. Well, very much looking forward to it. Bryan.
Thanks. I appreciate you asking about it.
Yeah. Bryan, do you have any words for your World Prog-Nation fans?
I'm grateful that there's people out there who enjoy this music, So, there's this thing that's going on where there's like less and less people who are referencing kind of traditional pop or rock band format as their main musical interface. Some people are just into hip hop or electronica or other things that don't involve guitar. It's kind of a touchstone. Does it have a guitar? And so it's great to know that there's people out there who are like still flying this flag, because my intention is to keep making music and being a part of projects that deliver music to the people who want to hear that kind of stuff, because I'm one of them.
Right on.
So, World Prog-Nation people,